can find environmental issues, economic issues, indigenous rights, women's rights, poverty, mass migration, and war and peace. And just as in ecology in general, all of these things are interrelated. So I want to take you on a whirlwind tour of coffee, economics, and the environment, and their impact on migratory species and critical migratory bird habitat in the coffee lands. I'll also talk about what's being done and how coffee companies either engage or take advantage of the dynamics at play in the world of coffee to make the world a better place or just make a killing. So if you're ready, let's take flight. All right. Coffee is grown in around 87 countries around the equator, 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south of the equator, between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. There are drylands countries, there are desert countries, there are savanna countries, and there are a lot of countries with mountains and high tropical forests, which are the primary breeding grounds, winter grounds of migratory species, at least from our hemisphere, okay? Asia and Africa, from Europe and North Asia, it's a little different, but we're gonna talk about our relationship between where you live and where the birds go. And I hope that the birds I've identified tonight are the right ones for you. And you'll have to tell me if, yeah, these are the birds we see, these are the ones we're looking at, okay? I may have missed by a state or two in my picking around, okay? So, there are about 2,000 migratory species. That represents about 19% of all bird species. And in that 2,000 species, there are about 50 billion birds migrating every year. A lot of birds. But it was a lot more once, because many species have been decimated. Many species have dropped by 50% or more in the last 30, 40 years. And we're going to talk about why. All right. Now, in those countries, we find tropical forests, and tropical forests, as I said, the primary place for migratory species. And in those tropical forests where coffee grows, the most optimal environment are shade-grown coffee farms. I'm not using the word plantation, because plantation generally means a monocrop, a monocultural, large-scale farm. We don't deal with that. In the world of migratory bird habitat, in the world of habitat protection, we talk shade-grown. So here you see, in two different countries, in Guatemala and in Peru, two really great examples of shade-grown coffee. And we're gonna talk about that now. You'll see a lot of different tree species. You can see coffee is the squat, really green plant in the forefront and in the background in the slide on, I think, on your left. Okay. Two other examples. On the right, you see a lot of coffee growing under bananas and under the hardwood trees in the back. And in Guatemala on the right, you see a massive shade-grown coffee farm in terms of what the plants are doing. It's interesting, in Latin America, and they tend to have plants about the same size as people. This is a very old farm, so the plants are higher, but they tend to be about the size of the farmers. In Africa, the plants can get up to 20 feet, and they use hooks to grab the plant, pull it over, and pick it. Very different styles. So I'd like to take you now on a little walk through a coffee forest. Okay, this is in Peru, and if I can get this thing to go, yeah. This is just a very brief walk through the forest, so you can see all the different species of trees. You can see the coffee there, coffee in the background. I took this, so pardon the sloppy camera work. There's coffee on the plant. It's usually red. Some varieties are yellow. Okay, there's some avocado trees we've planted, other trees. So this is really interesting. There's all the coffee underneath the higher hardwood canopy. Now, what's interesting, and you're also about to see right there, right there, that's cacao growing on trees. That's how cacao grows, right? Which makes chocolate. So what's interesting about this entire forest is it didn't exist 20 years ago. We worked with the farmers in that cooperative to plant that forest from scratch because it had been destroyed. It had been deforested by a much earlier international development program going after the wood and resettling colonists in the area. And that fell apart. And now we have a resuscitated, beautiful coffee forest. But what are we talking about? We're talking about a host of migratory species that come from our lands down to the coffee lands and nest in the coffee lands during our winter. Let's take a look at some of them so we have some perspective. The Baltimore Oriole, which I believe you find in your neck of the woods as well, can be found in the south in Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Colombia. So if you're interested in protecting the Oriole, those are coffee countries you can buy coffee from if you buy Smithsonian bird-friendly coffee or certified shade-grown coffee, all right? The most interesting thing about the Orioles down south is that they make these pendulous, long hanging nests that look like tube socks hanging from a tree. And it's a very interesting sight and very obvious. Another one of our good friends, rose-breasted grosbeak. And grosbeaks also live in Central America during the southern migration. So that's Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Colombia, which borders, as you can see, Panama. It's the northernmost, one of the northernmost South American countries. Interesting thing about the grosbeak is the male and female share the duties of incubation, of brooding, and of feeding. So, gentlemen, take a lesson here. Also, it's very interesting how the diet changes. The grosbeak eats insects up here, but down south, they eat fruit and seeds and not insects, although most birds do eat insects in the south. Scarlet tanager. Scarlet tanager flocks in large migrations, large migratory flocks. Mostly they fly across, not only through Mexico, but also directly across the Caribbean. They nest in high canopies in Colombia and Peru in South America. They don't really go into Central America much. One of the biggest problems for the tanager is that the cowbird often sneaks into the tanager nest and steals its egg and replaces it with a cowbird egg, and then waits while the tanager hatches and raises the cowbird young. So that's problematic because it gets rid of tanager eggs. Also, nesting pairs of tanagers remain together during the season and share the work of raising the young. The guys bring in the food, the women incubates and hatches. Nice division of labor. All right. Another example is the ovenbird. What's really interesting to me about the ovenbird, which is found, again, mostly in Central America, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and again in Colombia, the northern part of Colombia, is that they build a nest on the ground, and the nest looks like a Dutch oven, which is why they're called the ovenbird. And they rarely fly. They stay on the forest floor looking for insects and seeds. Okay. The wood thrush, which we all know is very, very popular, is found mostly in Central America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras. Okay. And also has a problem with cowbirds stealing eggs. But wood thrush populations have dropped almost 60% in the last 50 years. And the reason is, in the South, it's due to habitat destruction, which we're going to talk about. But here in the North, it's due largely to the impact of acid rain. Not acid rain on the bird or its egg, but acid rain which destroys the shells of the invertebrates, which the thrushes eat and then use to create calcium in their shells. So it's an indirect impact of acid rain, dating back to obviously Silent Spring. Okay. Last one I'll talk about mentions yellow-bellied sapsucker, which we have a lot of here in my backyard. And the yellow-bellied sapsucker is the only sapsucker that migrates. Okay, you can find it in Central America, largely Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras. And what's interesting for them is that the males and females migrate separately. The females go further south faster while the male remains in the US longer. Okay, so basically it's you go on ahead, honey, I'll catch up kind of a thing. Sapsuckers are generally considered a keystone species because after they leave, other birds and other creatures, insects, use the holes that they make to get food out of, and sometimes to find housing in if the hole's big enough. So we have a host of other birds. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just going to show them. Flycatchers, hawks, if you've ever seen the great hawk migrations, hummingbirds, only bird that can fly upside down and backwards, warblers, different kinds of warblers, barn swallows, which interestingly enough, we don't talk about them in coffee because they not only are they all over the coffee lands, but they live in houses and barns, so they don't really need the coffee fields. But as you can see from the map, barn swallows have the largest migratory pattern of any of the birds because they go everywhere in Central and South America. They're all over the place. Okay. And vireos as well, beautiful vireos. All right, so each species has its own preferred habitat, and each species has its own kind of tree that it likes, its own ground cover, its own food source. And so everything is different. Every habitat is different. Every need of habitat is different. Now, I want to get into some of the things that impact habitat that we don't usually think of. And the biggest one is coffee economics. I don't know how many people who are watching tonight understand how coffee is priced, but it's really, really fascinating. And I'm going to give you a little insight into it. It goes like this. Coffee prices are not determined by a farmer standing there and shaking hands with a buyer. Okay, that would be free trade if it existed, but it doesn't. Coffee prices are determined in a trading ring in New York and also one in London called the New York Board of Trade, the London Board of Trade. And every day, this is an old picture now, a lot of it's computerized, but every day these men in these different colored tunics run into the ring and they bid up or down the price of coffee depending on the information they're getting from their sources of information. So they're finding out, well, if there's a peace deal in Colombia, that means more coffee will be able to get out into the market. That means the price is going to drop because greater supply at the same demand. Price drops. So they start buying futures of coffee at a lower price, and it drives the price down. Conversely, if there's a frost in Brazil, the largest producer of coffee in the world, Vietnam is second, Colombia is third. If there's a frost in Brazil, that means that there'll be less coffee on the market. Drop in supply for the same demand, the price goes up. So they start bidding up the price of coffee. That's how the coffee market always worked. But then in the 1990s, coffee became a real hot commodity. It never had been before. And all of a sudden, investment banks, hedge funds, and all these other people besides coffee companies and exporters were getting involved in the buying and selling of coffee because people thought they could make a buck on it. So what happened was coffee, a very somnambulant, sleepy market where coffee companies and coffee farmers could kind of make sure that the coffee price stayed in a reasonable range, that went out the window and coffee became just another commodity being sold to make a buck. What did that do? It meant that the coffee price shot up and dropped like a rock, shot up and dropped like a rock, totally unconnected to the cost of growing and processing coffee for the farmer. So the farmer comes down the hill with a big bag of coffee on his back, and there's a guy in a pickup truck at the bottom of the hill who's going to buy his coffee. All right, this is kind of old school. He goes, Hey, here's my coffee. How much you're offering? Today we're offering $1 a pound. Okay, here's the coffee. He comes back the next day with another sack. It's the same coffee from the same crop, same process of preparing the coffee. He goes to the guy and says, here's the coffee. Where's my dollar? He goes, oh, no, no, no. The price today is 80 cents. What do you mean? It's the same coffee. It's the same cost of goods, the same administrative overhead. And he said, the world coffee price plummeted for some reason. I can only give you 80 cents today. As a result, since the mid 90s or late 90s, actually, the farmers have not been able to rely on the coffee market for a reasonable income. And that has meant that there's a lot of uncertainty in the life of a coffee farmer, which has led to, as I'm going to get into shortly, mass migration. So a large number of the farmers, a large number of the people that are coming up against our southern border are actually coffee farmers who can't make a living because the price of coffee is too low. Now, we don't see that when we go to the store because the retailers, the importers, the roasters, the retailers mark it up so much. So we're paying $15 to $20 a pound for coffee, often hidden because you buy it in 12 ounces or 10 ounces, but it's $15, $20, $30 a pound for coffee, and the farmer's getting 90 cents. Today they're getting $1.28, but 2 months ago they were getting 93 cents. Okay. In the 80s, according to UN statistics, the difference between what a farmer got and what a retailer got was 1 to 3. Every time the farmer got $1, the retailer got $3. Okay. Now it's between 1 and 10 and 1 and 20. So for every dollar the farmer gets, the retailer gets somewhere between 10 and $20. So that's what's happened in the world of coffee. The income inequity in coffee is beyond the charts. We don't see it because we're still paying all that money for coffee. Okay. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, it leads to a lot of problems. If the farmer can't make money on coffee, there's an incentive for them to cut down more trees and to plant more coffee, thinking that, well, if I sell more coffee, at least I'll bring in more money, even at a lower price. That's led to a lot of small-scale deforestation, which adds up, okay? And since coffee farms are where a majority of migratory species actually go in the winter, impacting the size of those farms has a real impact on the migratory bird habitat. So deforestation is really one of the major fallouts of both coffee price and many other reasons. All right, deforestation shows up, it causes habitat destruction by large-scale mining, large-scale ranching, large-scale monoculture, such as coffee plantations, pineapples, broccoli, and other export crops. And as you see in that weird-looking wormy picture on top, that's palm oil. Palm oil is the largest driver of deforestation in Asia. I'm going to talk about it a little more later. All right. Now, I want to just say a word about ranching, because everybody thinks ranches are destroying, like the jungle in tropical forests in Brazil, because people want to put cows on there so they can sell hamburgers on what they call the hamburger highway. Make hamburger in Argentina and Brazil, sell it to America, and that's what's causing deforestation. Well, actually, it's not. What's behind the land grab and the burnings in the Amazon, it's really driven largely by land speculation. And here's why. The Amazon is owned by the Brazilian government. It's not owned by the indigenous tribes that have lived there for millennia. It's owned by the government. But if you go into the forest and you mark off an area and you start clearing it and you put some animals on it, then you have the right of use. Usufruct, it's called in law. You have the right of use. If you use that land for 5 years, the government will give you title to that land. Then you turn around and you sell it for a lot more money than you paid for it. And land in the Amazon appreciates at about 1,000% a year, which is a very good investment if that's the way you think about these things. So what's pushing a lot of destruction in the Amazonian rainforest and other rainforests is really about land appreciation, land grabbing and land appreciation, often by generals, often by large corporations who send out poor farmers onto that land, give them a couple of years to work it, kick them out, then turn around and sell the land for so much more than it's worth. So, all our noise about hamburgers, this is one of these things where we want to help. So we're not going to buy that hamburger from Argentina, or we're going to write a letter to Burger King or whatever. That's not it. It's about land speculation, and the hamburger thing isn't going to stop it. All right. Interesting thing. Coffee plantations, two large issues with coffee plantations. One is that coffee plantations take up large areas of formerly tropical forest to put in a monocrop. A monocrop in a hot tropical environment requires chemicals to live because it doesn't get the nutrients from the soil, because now the soil is baked by the sun, and the soil is not being replenished by an interspecied tropical forest. It's purely monocrop, one crop, sucks up, whether it's cotton, broccoli, or coffee, sucks up all the nutrients. So you need to put chemicals in there to replenish the nutrients and to hold the soil together. So you need pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So that is a major problem for coffee. And I'm going to talk about pesticides a little more too. All right. But again, there's an incentive. The lower the prices are in coffee, the more incentive there is for farmers to clear more land, to grow more coffee. And that doesn't help. The other big driver of environmental problems in the coffee lands is climate change. And deforestation is the most immediate. Climate change is the most long-term. Climate change, of course, is a worldwide phenomenon, but it has very specific and localized micro impacts in most coffee growing regions. So what does climate change look like in coffee countries? It means rising temperatures. Now, coffee requires a very narrow band. Like all plants, it lives in its own band of temperature. And if you change that band of temperature by a degree or two, the plant will die. I mean, it's the same as your house plants, right? If you leave them out in the winter, they die. Or if you put them under the sun next to a window, you can fry the plant. It needs its optimal temperature range and shade range. All right. So the other problem is that rainfall varies. So once, when you could count on rainfall during the months of, in Latin America, in the months of February through May, that's shifted. So now rainfall patterns have been disrupted. So they either come earlier or come later. What's the problem with that? For a plant, the problem with that is that the flowering of the plant is dependent on rainfall being there at the right time and in the right amount. If the rainfall comes too early, the flowers come and then they get bloated with water and they fall off. If the rainfall comes too late, the flowers come and then the fruit comes out of the flower, right? The flower comes and then it wilts because it doesn't have enough rain at the right time. It wilts and falls off. If it wilts and falls off, no berry forms, okay? So that's how rainfall, the change of rainfall impacts coffee production. So the other big impact of climate change is that weather patterns are being disrupted and weather events are being disrupted. So in Africa, we're seeing, as you can see in that photo I took in Kenya, serious drought. Those are coffee plants, dead of drought, okay? In Indonesia, wildfires that are bigger than the ones in California are happening on an annual basis, destroying a lot of tropical forest. In Latin America, particularly, hurricanes have grown in number and intensity, which brings landslides, which brings destruction of plants, which brings destruction of towns. Other impacts from these climatic changes are changes in the yields of the plant. right? Because if the flowers aren't growing or they're growing at different times, the crop that's supposed to produce 20 pounds of coffee per bush per year may be cut down to 10, with a terrible impact on the income of the farmer. If the yields are cut, then the coffee farmer, again, is encouraged to plant more trees. Also, coffee plants have become more impacted by climate change by becoming less disease resistant. And also the potency of the diseases and the pests has increased dramatically because of climate change. So what that means is the coffee plant, because of the change of weather patterns, change of rainfall, is a weaker plant. As such, it's more prone to coffee pests and diseases. As you can see on Doña Marlena's farm in Nicaragua, in the top left, her entire farm was destroyed by rust. Rust is a fungus that grows in the soil. It's always there, but it's generally controlled by a strong plant and good soil. But because of climate change, the plants are weakened, the soil is more friable, and rust has exploded. In recent years, as much as 30% of the crop of Colombia has been destroyed, 20% of Peru, 30% of Mexico. But that doesn't tell the real tale because we're talking about micro impacts. So in some valleys, such as where Doña Marlena is in Nicaragua, the farmers have lost 100% of their crop, while in the next valley, nobody has been affected. But collectively, the figure is, okay, in Nicaragua, they lost 50% of their crop. That doesn't tell you the human story, okay? And the problem with losing your crop is rust destroys the tree. That means the tree has to be taken out by the roots and burned and destroyed. To plant a coffee tree, you have to wait for 5 years for that tree to produce a fruit that you can then sell on the market. It'll produce a fruit in 3 or 4 years, but those first years, it's too bitter, you can't use the bean. So it takes 5 years. So imagine Doña Marlena has to go 5 years without income because the overwhelming majority of coffee farmers in the world get 80 to 100% of their income from coffee and very little from other crops. So rust or broca, which is an insect that's spreading now. It used to only be in Central South America. Now it's in Hawaii. It's in Ethiopia. It's traveling into Africa because of climate change. It's broadening its range. Very, very destructive. Hi, I've got a puppy visitor. You sit down quietly now. You've heard this talk before. Okay, so climate change is creating a major impact on coffee farms and destroying habitat. Obviously destroys habitat for the farmer and for the birds. Well, birds aren't the only migrants. As I mentioned earlier, when the price is low and the land is being destroyed by climate change, what do the farmers do? They migrate. They migrate north. That's me in Mexico at the Mexican-Guatemalan border. I'm talking to coffee farmers who are migrating north on what's called the death train that comes all the way through Mexico from the Mexican-Guatemalan border and dumps migrants off close enough that they can then walk to the border, all right? This is a real problem. And the majority of migrants in recent history who've come up against our border are agricultural workers. The majority of them are coffee farmers. I know that because we did a survey of the 5 consulates along the Mexican border, on the American side, and got the statistics on who's coming across and also, frankly, who dies in the desert. And 85% were farmers. So because the price of coffee is low and climate change is impacting the farmers are leaving. So if people would pay more for the coffee, I don't mean us paying more, we're already paying more. But if the roasters and the importers would pay more to the farmers for the coffee, they could stay on their land and a lot of the impact of the migration problem on our border would be solved. Okay, I could talk about that in great detail, but not enough time tonight. All right. So, given the complexity of economic, environmental, and social issues in the coffee lands, how can we guarantee that critical migratory bird species and habitat are going to be recognized as important and be protected? Now, this question's been on the mind of scientists and environmentalists for decades, so I want to give you a very quick rundown on the evolution of the approaches to eco-management, okay? First off, the organic movement. This is a list of the top pesticides used on coffee today, all right? Now, you'll note that a majority of these pesticides are either banned or strictly limited for use here in the United States, but we can manufacture them here and export them to coffee countries to be used on coffee, okay? So that's called the circle of poison. Then those pesticides on those coffee plants turn around and get imported back into the United States on coffee. But the biggest impact is on the farmers, on the farm lands, on the water, on the insects, on the eggshells, on the bird species. Okay, so chemicals in coffee are really, really dangerous. As you can see on the top of the list, DDT is still used in coffee production in Latin America primarily, okay, regardless of the fact that it's banned for use in the United States. So the organic movement came along and said, okay, let's limit or inhibit or ban the use of pesticides in coffee, and that will do a lot to preserve land and species as well as the health of farmers. But the organic movement didn't directly address the loss of habitat. So in 1994, the Smithsonian Institute held a conference on migratory birds and coffee, and we helped fund it. We were one of the first funders of that. All right. And so what we know is the different ways coffee grows are shown in this slide. In sun-grown coffee, which is the monoculture coffee that we talked about, Smithsonian found about 61 different bird species. In small farms by indigenous farmers that are just doing what they always did for centuries, there are 79 bird species located in those smaller farms. So Smithsonian developed a program, and in that program where they measured what a real solid bird forest is like in the South, and then said, okay, how can we make sure this is duplicated or replicated on coffee farms to create bird-friendly coffee? They found in those areas over 200, just about 250 bird species have been identified. So it's 5-6 times what you find on sun-grown, 4 times what you find, 3 times what you find in partial sage or what are called traditionally grown coffees. So this is the backdrop of the science that Smithsonian started to investigate to see what they could do. All right. So the Smithsonian program, and this is what it is, the Smithsonian program that was developed is this. At a minimum, if a farm wants to apply for bird-friendly certification, it must have organic certification already. It has to be organic certified to even apply. Now that means not only no external pesticides, but certified organic means that the farmers have gone through a 3-year training program, not only on how not to use pesticides and what to use instead, but also soil conservation, water conservation, and nutrition recycling through composting. So that's phase 1. The farmers also have to have structural diversity of habitat, as in this illustration. And what that means is, first, they need every plot of land that they grow coffee on, 40% of that plot has to be covered in foliage. And there must be at least one anchor species or backbone species, which is the tallest trees, the ones that everything else kind of depends on. And there must be more than 10 other woody species, mostly hardwoods, in evidence on that plot. So it has to be heavily forested and forested with trees, not just with bushes. So you can't just put a bunch of coffee bushes on, like in the sun-grown thing, and say, oh, we've got foliage coverage. No, it has to be of trees and diverse trees. Within that foliage coverage, there must be 3 layers. The top canopy has to be between 36 feet and 120 feet or taller of natural native hardwoods. And that has to constitute 60% of the coverage of that 40% plot, right? So 60% of the 40% of the plot has to be in these super high hardwood trees. The middle layer, the middle canopy, has to be made up of taller emergent trees. 20% of the plot must be covered in mid-level trees. And that doesn't count things like eucalyptus, fir trees, lontoros, or other imported trees. They have to be native trees. So they're trying to ensure the preservation, conservation, or reestablishment of native hardwood forests, which are what the migratory species want. All right. So the understory then, which is another 20% of the plot, is shrubbery and small trees, and that can include coffee. That's what you see in the partial shade section there. Okay, so the Smithsonian is actually, is the large trees, the medium trees, and the coffee and fruit trees underneath. This specificity mirrors exactly what different species want to see. And since you do it by what's available locally, you guarantee that the particular migratory species that comes to your farm, in your valley, in your country, gets the habitat that it requires. This is not about like Arbor Day, where everybody goes out and plants pine trees, which don't do much for climate and don't do much at all for migratory species. This has to be relevant to the species itself. So this is the basis of the Smithsonian program. Now, interestingly, there's more research coming up. As we're starting to learn more and more about how those migratory species inhabit these forests, we're turning to exactly what they eat. So we're looking at what we find inside those trees, because that's as important as the tree itself. So if the insect variation on what's inside those trees isn't there, you can still have the trees, but you don't have the food source. So this is the next layer, the deeper level that Smithsonian is looking at now. You can pretty much guarantee that if the tree is there, the insect will be there, but not necessarily. And we want to make these programs investigating the bark and the soil for insects and microflora as profound as possible. Okay, so as I said earlier, coffee represents between 80 and 100% of the income of the average coffee farming family. So unless coffee farmers participate in some sort of model like Smithsonian that protects habitat and allows the farmers, the ability to stay on their land, then all of this is a waste of time. So unfortunately, coffee companies have a range of choices. I call it 50 shades of green. So coffee companies can totally ignore this, as most large companies do, and the consuming public doesn't seem to care. They can ignore it, but use marketing terms like eco-friendly or sustainable that really have no meaning or legal meaning, but they're very confusing to consumers. And there are a lot of labels out there that people plaster on their bags that give a lot of misrepresentation to consumers about what's being done with their dollar. And that's why I say, with all these environmental initiatives, with all these labels, how come more and more habitat is disappearing? And one of the reasons is because the coffee companies are not really stepping up to the plate and participating in the deepest, best programs, which are organic, fair trade for the farmers, and bird friendly for habitat preservation. So the best way is to buy the Smithsonian coffee. But even Smithsonian coffee has some problems with it. And that is not with the program itself, but how it's used by the coffee companies, by the marketplace. Several companies have one or two coffees that are Smithsonian bird friendly, and then that's it, which is great for those farmers, but in a sense, they're being held hostage so that that company can sell all those other coffees, which don't do good things for the environment of the farmer. And that's a greenwashing technique that a lot of consumers get trapped by. They figure if Starbucks has one shade bird-friendly coffee, then everything must be bird-friendly. That's a common refrain I hear. Or Green Mountain, if Green Mountain Keurig has a bird-friendly coffee, well, everything must be bird-friendly, or everything must be fair trade or organic. No, only 10, 15%. Starbucks, 3%. So, coffee companies really use the labels and the language generically and give us a false impression. And the Smithsonian certificate also, while it's good for us and it's good for the birds, it's not necessarily great for the farmers because there's no guarantee that the farmer is going to get any more money. So the farmer goes through all this work and has to pay for certification, but there's no requirement that a buyer pays more for bird-friendly coffee. Now, many of us do by choice because we believe in it, but it's not a requirement. And I have this argument with Smithsonian a lot because I'm in constant communication. I was emailing back and forth today about our next project, which I'm going to show you, and trying to get Smithsonian to require in their licenses that coffee companies that buy bird-friendly coffee throw in at least a 10-cent premium so that the farmers have an incentive to keep in the program and some extra money they can use to better their habitat or at least feed their kids. But that's not in the program, unfortunately. So while we're waiting for Smithsonian to evolve as a program, we personally have gone a few steps ahead. One of the things we're doing is we're working directly with Smithsonian. We're the only coffee company to do that. And it's frankly because I'm a lawyer, I'm an advocate, and this is the way we do things. But we work with Smithsonian directly because Smithsonian only has 4 people on their staff at the Smithsonian Migratory Birds Center. And they've got a lot of sort of university researchers, but they don't have outreach people to go to those farms and get those farmers to understand the program, the benefits to their environment, the benefits hopefully to their economics. So they really don't have a lot of outreach. So I said, look, there's a lot of importers and there's a lot of companies like ours that go down and have relationships with the farmers. Why don't you use us to be your advocates to get farmers interested? So we said, let's experiment. So we experimented with Pangoa Cooperative in Peru, which I'm going to talk about right now, and got Pangoa to sign on to become part of the bird-friendly program. And it's been wonderfully successful for them. But we have had a long-term project at Dean's Beans called the Cool It campaign, which is how we deal with climate change. As you heard in the introduction, our business model is that in every cooperative we buy from, in the 10 countries we're in, we have a development relationship. So not only do we buy the coffee at higher than fair trade prices, but we also design and fund development programs on the farms that are managed by, co-designed and managed by the farmers themselves. We don't bring in NGOs and churches and governments. We don't rely on outside funding. This is us and the farmers own and operate the programs. The range of programs goes everywhere from women's loan funds to cervical cancer work, to school building, to well building. but there's a big basket of things that are related to climate, and we include the Bird Friendly Initiative in there, and that's our Cool It campaign. In the Pangoa Cooperative, we met with them. We talked about the programs we were already doing with them, which was massive reforestation with hardwoods, with indigenous hardwoods, and then the creation of a giant composting operation, which creates compost from farm waste and then gives it back to the farmers for free, and creation of a giant hardwood and fruit tree nursery. And that's all part of our way of supporting the bird-friendly program at Pangoa. And it's been very, very successful. So here you see some examples. And as I said, the forests that you're seeing did not exist when we started working with Pangoa. And now, 20 years later, we have planted over 300,000 hardwood trees and reclaimed huge valleys in Amazonian Peru, where Pangoa is. It's been a very, very successful program, and it's a very successful bird-friendly program that a lot of people now are buying from. It's not just us. As I said, we got it started, we helped them get in the program, and now they're selling everywhere. We're also now working in Sumatra, in Indonesia. There are no bird-friendly certified farms in Asia, and Smithsonian is very excited about getting into Asia. We've had a great presence in Asia for 28 years, and I've worked with the same farmers in the same region of Indonesia for pretty much that entire time. So we've been working with farmers to create the nurseries, to create the hardwoods and the fruit trees, and to do the reforestation, paying farmers to reforest. And also, we just finished the first birding survey in Sumatra, in the coffee lands of Sumatra. Now that that's finished, we pulled together a university, a good nonprofit for the organizing, and some great birders and the coffee farmers. We pulled it together and we did a great birding survey and tree survey in northern Sumatra, in this area we work in, which is a very important ecosystem for a lot of endangered species, as well as the migratory birds. It's the first migratory bird survey in this area. And it is the basis that we're now moving to, and that was what I was emailing today with everybody. We're getting the pre-survey done for bird-friendly certification. We're going to start that as soon as we can get our birder guy down there, whose name in Indonesian, oddly in English, is Agus. Anyway, we're getting Agus to go down there to do his survey and to make sure the Smithsonian guidelines are met. And then we're really underway in getting the first certified bird-friendly farms in Asia, which is great. And once that happens, other farms, other co-ops will see that and get excited about it, and then it will spread. And that's what our mission is. So that's great. The other part of our work in Sumatra is, as I said, oil palm is the biggest cause of deforestation in Asia. You can see that's what a palm oil plantation looks like. Totally wipe out tropical forests and plant this monoculture, which totally destroys the bird habitat because they don't nest in oil palms. It destroys the food source because the kind of insects and the kind of microflora that grow in the soil in their forests are not the same as in these monocrop plantations. So bird populations have plummeted in northern Sumatra where this is happening. Also, this has impacted a lot of endangered species. The orangutan is, there are only 2 places in the world with the orangutan, and this is one of them. And orangutan habitat has been decimated by palm. Same with the endangered Sumatran elephant, the tiger, the hippo, the rhino. These are all endangered species. And the reticulated python is not endangered, but as you can see, it's you can still find it, as I found out. But I was told that that one had eaten probably a month ago. And since they only eat once every 3 months, it was very sluggish and I could hold it. So I got a good picture taken. Anyway, so that's what we're doing in Sumatra, and we're working with Smithsonian to branch out there. So the question is, how can we work together to save migratory birds worldwide? Well, we're doing our part, and your part is to learn about these things like we're doing tonight, to learn about the real issues behind the destruction of migratory habitat, and to support companies, not only ours, plenty of them, who buy bird-friendly coffee, but use your smarts and go in and look at the company's website, see how many bird-friendly offerings they have, maybe contact them and say, why don't you get more? We'll buy it if you get it, and try to push them. Or if you go to a local coffee company that you go into, and not lately, but once cafes start opening up, go in and say, do you serve bird-friendly coffee here? Why not? It's easy to get. You'd be helping migratory birds, you'll be helping the farmers. It's the highest level of environmental protection. The next thing you can do is share this information with your friends. I'm hoping that Greg recorded this, and I give you permission to use it as often as you want, to share it with your friends or with other chapters around the state that might want to learn about this. It's my pleasure. Like I say, it's not about Dean's beans. It's really about the environment. It's about the birds, the farmers. It's about our planet. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been interesting for you. And if we've got time for a few questions, I'm game for that. As soon as I can figure out how to get out of here, escape, it should work. There we are. All right. And back we go, full screen. Okay. Get rid of that. Okay, here we go. Okay. Do we have time for a few questions, or does anybody have anything to ask?
Well, while everybody's thinking of their question, Dean, I was fascinated, and I'm hoping a lot of others were fascinated with the information, because this is a whole new world for me, and I'm expecting somewhat for everybody else. So don't be bashful. Dean's right here. He knows a lot about this, so jump in.
But you know a lot more than I do about the birds themselves, I can assure you. Mary?
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, yeah, hi, thank you very much for your presentation.
Pleasure.
I've been buying bird-friendly coffee off and on for several years now. I started with Thanksgiving Coffee Company, and now Birdsong from Cornell Lab.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you know anything about I'm hoping that that's the best coffee to buy. I mean, not in farmers companies, but am I, making the right choices there?
Well, Cornell Labs is absolutely the best. There's no question about that. But they're not a business.
Mm-hmm.
And,
right.
Neither Smithsonian. So just because a business figures out a way to make a relationship with them doesn't necessarily mean that that's in the best interest of, whatever the cause is. Mm-hmm. To be frank, there's a company out there who, I won't name them, but I can tell you this: I started it, and then I hired a marketing guy who then just took it, disappeared, and started it on his own. I'm not the kind of guy, even though I'm a lawyer, who sues people, so I let it go, and they are selling bird-friendly coffee, but I can't tell you that they're paying any more to them. And that's the issue, Like, if I'm buying bird-friendly coffee, but I'm buying it for the same price as I'm buying every other coffee, but I'm charging you more, and I'm not giving more of that back to the farmer for habitat preservation or whatever, what have I done? It gives us a false impression about what's being done in our name and with our money. And we think, okay, well, that problem's solved. I'll go work on something else, right? That's what we do, because there's so many things to change in this world. So, part of it too is that a lot of the people involved in the companies are good people, but they don't have the broad, they don't have the broad range of understanding of these things. With that particular company, I can tell you, if those people have ever been to a coffee country, it's a surprise to me, Now, Paul Katzeb, who started Thanksgiving, is a dedicated coffee guy. He's a dedicated environmentalist. Paul and I are very dear friends, go buy his coffee. He's a great guy. And he's got a great business, you know, and he gives back a lot. So there you go. There are, you know, any of the companies from Cooperative Coffees, there are 17 members of Cooperative Coffees, any of them who are buying bird-friendly coffee, you can feel really good about, because all of those companies are deeply engaged with the lives of the farmers. They're not just making money on this end. They're deeply engaged with the lives of the farmers, not just visiting once, you know, and like taking some pictures and picking a bean and taking a picture, you know, sort of like exploitation tourism, but seriously have a relationship with farmers. And to me, that's, you know, you got to understand your supply chain. You have to know what the impact is at the farm level of your business practices. And a lot of people don't. They buy from a broker, they sell, they make a lot of money. Coffee is a very lucrative business. Remember what I said, it used to be 1 to 3. The farmer got 1, the retailer got 3. Now it's 1 to 20. People make a lot of money in coffee and the farmers are still dirt poor. So there you go.
So
is
Dean,
your, this is,
let me jump in real quickly and ask you, did you say cooperative farmers?
Cooperative Coffees, it's a cooperative I helped found way back in the early 90s, and we're not part of it anymore, we're too big, but there are 17 other companies all over the US and in Canada who all participate in the same business model. So there's Peace Coffee in Minneapolis, there's Kickapoo Coffee. Well, they changed their name. It used to be Kickapoo. In Michigan, there's Higher Ground in Michigan. They're all over the country. Cafe Campesino in Georgia. Boulder, Colorado's got them. Equator Coffee in Canada. They're all over the place. But if you look up cooperative coffees, you'll see all the choices you have. Besides Dean's Beans, Equal Exchange has 1 or 2 bird-friendly offerings, I think. So they're out there. But again, you know, it's not just the fact that it's bird-friendly. Make sure that the company is really committed to this stuff and not just using it as a vehicle to get your money.
And just for a shorthand, because I can only remember just so much, Dean, if we find a fair trade logo on the package, are we safe with that?
Well, there's different, yeah, on the package itself, that means fair trade, the fair trade logo isn't about a company, it's about a transaction. That's where it gets a little misleading. Fair trade is not the company. Fair trade is a certificate you get that says you can participate in the fair trade system. And when you do, these are the rules you abide by. So if you find a bag with the fair trade logo on it, it should mean that the coffee in there was bought under fair trade terms. Not that the company's fair trade, not that everything they do is fair trade, but only that transaction was a fair trade transaction. And that's why Starbucks can get away with being 3% fair trade. And what does that mean in actuality? It means if they gather farmers in a room, let's say they gather 100 farmers in the room, they go, you, and you 3, you 4. We're going to treat you fairly. We're going to give you a better price. We're going to give you better terms. You 96, take a hike, right? That's what it really means. If you're 4% fair trade, it means 96% of the farmers you deal with are getting screwed. Or if you're 15%, then 85% of the farmers you deal with are getting screwed. So if you're going to do fair trade, it's just like I was talking about with bird friendly, go for the 100%ers. They're the only ones who are serious. The other ones are just buying it like a commodity. Okay.
I guess I'm trying
to tell you horror stories about that, but I won't. We don't have time.
Okay. I guess I'm trying to find a shorthand method without making this a science project, a shorthand method.
So the best thing is if you get the bird friendly, I got a cortisone shot today. If you get the bird friendly seal, that tells you it's certified organic and it's certified habitat protecting bird friendly. Okay. So that's great. But that doesn't help the farmer per se. If you want to make sure that the farmer's participating economically in a way that's going to keep him on his farm, then you have to have fair trade in there. Because Rainforest Alliance, Utskape, which is another seal, organic even, that has nothing to do with the price. Like the Rainforest Alliance seal has nothing to do, doesn't guarantee the farmer any price whatsoever. It's a good environmental seal, but it requires the farmer to do all this stuff with no guarantee they're going to get any extra money. So a lot of farmers have been bought into the rainforest seal, but it doesn't do them any good. It makes us feel better. It doesn't do them any good. And Rainforest has a version of shade grown as part of their requirements, but they just lowered them last year. Why? So that larger companies can participate because they got lower shade requirements. That means that someone with a bigger farm and less shade who sells to Starbucks can get a rainforest seal. So the consumer can see a rainforest seal. Now, rainforest seal's got some pretty good stuff in it, but if you're going to bother going for seals, go for the best. Go for bird friendly and organic and fair trade. There's plenty of coffee that carry those seals. You're not going to starve. You're not going to miss out on a good cup of coffee.
But Dean, this is Rita Renwick. Your coffee, Dean's Beans,
Yep.
is your seal, and it's your company, right? And
Yep.
you're the one who deals with how many growers and how many countries?
We work in 10 countries, and collectively there are about over 50, maybe 60,000 farmers in all those cooperatives we deal with.
And so you are bird friendly and you are organic and you are fair trade?
Okay, so we use bird friendly. Here's the problem. Bird friendly, as I said, Smithsonian's a small organization. They're only in 4 countries. We're in 10.
Mhm.
I said to Bob Rice years ago with Smithsonian, I was like, Bob, I will be 100% bird friendly once you start getting bird friendly in Asia. We buy from Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, Timor, and there ain't no Smithsonian programs there. We buy from Ethiopia. Smithsonian just came into Ethiopia, but we've been buying there. Fair trade, we were the first fair traders in Ethiopia. We've been there since 2004, but Smithsonian is now there. So, okay. Same with Honduras. Now they're in Honduras. Great. So they're starting to spread. So as many countries as they're in, we're in, but we're also in 6 other countries.
Mhm.
So we can't say we're 100% bird friendly.
No, but
Because of
your
that.
coffee, you are considering all of it's everything you've talked about tonight, correct? So we can buy Dean's Beans coffee.
Oh, yeah, of course you can. I'm just not trying to use this as a sales vehicle.
Well, I know. But I think people are really
yeah.
searching for the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to start setting up, I think I'm going to start setting up some birder trips because so many people are interested. Anybody wants to go down to Peru or Nicaragua and go on a birding trip, we'll set it up. And we know how to do it right with the farmers so that they're actually getting a benefit out of it, not just us. So we used to do trips in the past, and now we'll start doing them again. Now that we're opening up again. But
sign me up, Dean. It's interesting that you mentioned that because on the ABA website, the American Birding Association website, where I got some of the information for my own education, they did discuss birding excursions on coffee farms in Central and South America. So that's very interesting and tempting to me.
Yeah.
I think, Greg, I will send out some pictures. When I went with Pat Ward to Mexico, we visited Jorge Mueller's coffee farm, and there were myna birds in his. Oh, it was a wonderful, wonderful. It had the coffee plants, but the forest itself was the most magnificent thing. So I'll share that.
Mary, go ahead.
Remember now, like I said, this isn't, I'm not fooling around here.
Yeah.
Coffee farms throughout the equatorial band, that's where the migratory birds go. So you're going to see them. Yeah, they're there.
Hi. You were
Mary?
mentioning the involvement that some of the governments actually own the land or possess the land. Do you have any diplomatic relationships with these governments, or do you have to deal with them, or how does How does that affect your the
No. I was
situations?
an indigenous rights and environmental lawyer since the very late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what those governments do in those countries. And, you know, so we only work directly. We never work with governments. We don't.
But they don't have like rules and regulations for you or anything?
No. You know why? The irony is because we're doing the work in these villages that they should be doing, and they're happy that they don't have to pay for, right?
Yep.
They build a school, we build a school, they're happy, So it's a win-win in a sense, and the farmers don't say, wow, the government did this. No, they know. And the other thing I didn't talk about, because it's a whole nother conversation, is that 85% of all coffee farmers are indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have a very unique set of problems, social, economic, environmental problems in these countries. They are not part of the mainstream. They generally don't even speak the language. So they can't rely on the government for schools, for economic assistance. It's just not there. And the government's more than happy for somebody else to work with them because they don't care about them, frankly.
They don't want to cut of your profits or anything like that. I mean, is there any problems in that regard?
No, never had an issue. No, the only time I had an issue was in the one time was my first trip to Sumatra, where we started this program building a water supply system in a village. And when I came back, I went to a coffee conference and someone said, oh, Dean, you have to meet General Baba from Indonesia. He's going to be so happy to hear about your program. So he told him about the program, and the general was furious, yelling and screaming. And the guy took me aside and said, he's very angry that you didn't come to him first. And I said, why? So we could pay him off? No, but that was the only time I ever heard anything from a government. Any other questions?
Do you speak some of the native languages? How do you communicate with the farmers?
Great question. So I speak Spanish. I speak sloppy Portuguese, which is helpful in Timor, which for 300 years was a Portuguese colony. I speak a little Indonesian. I've been going there for years, but I always have a translator, right? So, but the way I get into these villages, my relationship starts is I always make a speech that I learn in the indigenous language of the village. I call the embassy and ask them to translate it for me. I go on Google. There are ways to translate into Amharic. There are ways to translate into Mam, Quiche, Cachiquel, Tsutsuil, all these different languages. So I get the translation of my little speech, and then I go and I stand up in front of the co-op and I give my speech in their language. And it's always wrong, and I always mispronounce things, and they always laugh at me, and I always laugh back. And that creates a very human relationship. So they don't see me as this big white northern hierarchical guy who's coming down to be El Jefe again, right? I'm also short, which helps, because the majority, except in Africa, the majority of the world's coffee farmers are my height. And so there's this real eye-to-eye thing going on, which sociologically actually has meaning. I'm not a big guy. I'm not threatening in any way. So I have a lot of fun when I travel, and I stay with them. I don't stay in big hotels, and I eat the local food at great expense to my intestines. And I always make a lot of jokes, often a bit off color, but someone once told me, if you can tell a joke, you'll have an audience. If you can tell a dirty joke, you can have the world. So I always make these slightly off color jokes when I'm there, and people love it. So, my wife's been with me to Guatemala, and she's like, I can't believe how the old ladies just eat you up. They love you. So so that's my style. So yeah, even though there's language difficulties, there's always an interpreter, a local interpreter. And I always try to speak a little bit of the language, and then say thank you and please and where, and the basics in every language I will learn for the trip, and be able to say that. And it's appreciated. It's really appreciated.
Are you mentoring
on a trip with me, you'll see that.
Are you mentoring anyone to work with you
Well,
And grow.
it's interesting you say that. We have had for years an internship program where we take college students, usually just 3, maybe a year, 4 a year, and we send them into the co-ops with specific tasks to look at the impact of fair trade on women in the co-op, the impact of bird friendly, everything that the farmers want and we want information on. We send interns down. It's always a life-changing situation for the students, and we get great information back, and the farmers get respect, and we also pay the farmers for the visit. So all expenses paid, for that. We used to have a program, we haven't done it in a while, called that's the internship program, called the Java Trekker program, and that's for adults. So if you have a skill that could be useful to the folks in the co-op, whether it's some computer programs that they could use, or you're good with GPS and you can help GIS measure the land, all sorts of things. You're an electrician, you could look at some of the electrical systems. We would send adults down, teach English. We would send adults down for a week, for a month, whatever they chose to do. So we've done that for years. But I've been, I don't do this alone. I have other people work with me, and I'm actually right now looking for an assistant. But they got to live with us. They got to live in Massachusetts, and they have to be fluent in Spanish. So I am looking, because I need to pass it on more, But because of the nature of our work, I'm a facilitator, right? So we don't need offices in all these countries, right? We don't need a big staff because we're not the hierarchy. The people do the work, the people manage the work, the people own the work. That's what's unique about our development program. Like when Pangoa wanted to get involved in Smithsonian, they did the work. I brought down some birding guides in Spanish. I've got them right here in my room. I brought down the Peruvian birding guide in Spanish. I gave them copies of it. I gave out some binoculars. They had a couple of people there who were really excited, and they just took it and ran with it, So, our business, our model isn't the usual aid model of top-down, cookie-cutter Northern model. This is what we offer you. You want a chicken program? You have to get your kids to write letters. We don't want our kids to write letters. Then no chicken program. Okay, our kids will write letters. We don't do that. So, we've worked with the same people for over 20 years, and we've seen real change in people's lives from the work we've done together. And as I said, it's not about Dean's Beans, because we bring these co-ops into the world of fair trade, into the Smithsonian program, and then they're open for the whole world to buy from. And then I know that I've done my work. So we don't need a staff of hundreds, because we're facilitators, right? Then the market takes over. Then all the other good guys take over. So that's my role in it.
Somebody else has to have a question.
Pardon?
I was just saying somebody else has to have a burning question. Jump right in there.
I also appreciate that, you guys are, it's like 8:30 over, it's 9:30 by me, but it's 8:30 by you. So unless you got something, we can just call it quits. You can always email me to follow up. Greg has my email. I'm happy to share it. I love to correspond with people. Okay.
Where are you at in the East Coast?
I'm in Western Massachusetts.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Lots of birds. So this morning, right outside my kitchen, we see everybody we have a mating pair of bluebirds that just took up residence. We've got goldfinches like screaming at the door, juncos, titmouse nuthatches, sapsuckers, big sapsuckers. We saw pileated woodpeckers. They're like this big out here. Hairy and downy woodpeckers. Who else? Cardinals, obviously. You were talking about cardinals. So we're just like splashed with color. It's just wonderful right now. So I just sit there, my wife and I sit there with our coffee in the morning. Thank God for COVID. I don't have to go in the office. So we just sit there every morning and watch the birds. My daughter goes, Dad, you're starting to sound like one of those really old people who sits around and says, "Did you see the bird we just saw?" I said, "Yeah, I am. I know, and I love it." People don't understand us birders, do they? No. That's okay. It's our secret. All right, I'll let you guys go. Greg, are we good?
Well, yeah, I think we're good. We're better than good, Dean. I just can't thank you enough for this program. I know I learned a tremendous amount.
Great.
And for all you Will County Audubon people, you've not heard the last of this subject, believe me.
Beautiful. I'm glad I could contribute something. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, folks. Have a good night.
You
See
too.
you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now that Dean's gone, I got to say he inspired me with that discussion about humor and about telling a joke. So a priest, a Methodist minister, and a rabbi walk into a bar.
Easy there, Greg.
I don't really have a joke. I just wanted to say that. Before we go, though, I want to say that, and I didn't get to plug this while Dean was with us. I got the feeling that he had something else that he had to do. But Dean's Beans has been very supportive of our booth on May the 8th, where we're going to do that migration celebration at the Forest Preserve. There's a big box of coffee samples coming, and they've also provided us with a coupon code that we're going to display at that festival, as well as in the virtual Blue Stem Earth Festival that I made a video for. So in addition to doing this program for us, I mean, they've kicked in some merchandise and some discounts that I'm going to be spreading out with all of us guys too when the time comes. So more to come on that.
Good.
Fritz, any closing comments?
No, really appreciated Dean, and I appreciate your lining him up so that he could talk with us. And beyond that, I have nothing more to say.
Saw
It
Brown
was nice the
Creeper.
way he presented.
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, good speaker. And whoever thought of all this coffee economics and how the small time farmer is involved, and who knew about all this? And it certainly wasn't me.
I didn't.
No.
Yeah,
Thanks, Greg.
I've been kind of following it since the late 70s, early 80s. That's how I got into Thanksgiving coffee. But I'm so happy that it's still ongoing, but it seems to me it needs to be more. It's money.
Oh, right. And this is something that hit me a few months ago when this whole bird-friendly coffee idea came to my mind. I actually read it in a book, and this is something that I can help with in a very small way, but everybody that's sitting here who drinks coffee, we can all help with it. And it hits our mission as an Audubon chapter. It hits us right in the bullseye for education about environmental things. I mean, this is what we do. So that's what made it such a great subject, I thought.
Yep.
Yeah, it's something that an individual can do if they're looking for something to do and they really don't know how to get involved or do something positive. I think it's a a choice thing that, oh, I could do that, and if that's all they do, that's great.
Sure.
You know?
And the beauty of it is all you have to do is just buy bird-friendly coffee and you're on the team.
And this is my Thanksgiving coffee cup.
Oh,
It's from the 1980s. But
Well, you've about got that broken in then, Mary.
oh yeah. I actually usually put it on the shelf for my Sunday coffee cup. But
Oh,
Anything
Okay.
else before we part ways?
It was just interesting to hear him say too, that when you see them say bird friendly coffee, that it could only be 3% of their products. That was amazing. I didn't know that, you know.
Yeah. So again, it was a lesson to us as consumers. You got to kind of be a label reader.
Yeah.
And in my mind, as long as that package has that bird-friendly Smithsonian logo on it, then that's the best we can do. I mean, we've done as much as we can do.
but he's saying that really other coffees probably have, right? They have more. I mean, they don't deal with a lot of companies, Smithsonian,
Right.
right?
Well, right. You're not going to see that label on a can of Folgers, for instance.
Right.
Right.
So,
Unless they support 2% of the population or something.
well, but see, it
Yeah.
has to be on that can, though, just like he was saying. If
Yes.
it's not on that can,
Right.
then it's not bird friendly.
Right.
Right.
So even he said, even he admitted that not all of the coffee that Dean's Beans sells has that logo on it, because they buy from Ethiopia and from Sumatra and other places that Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center hasn't been to get them on the wagon train.
Right.
Yeah,
His is
but I
probably
think he also said that if the bag itself has that fair trade,
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And organic, I think he said too, those three
Yeah,
things.
organic too, yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing I'm glad he brought up was the palm oil plantations.
Oh, yeah.
They've really destroyed thousands of acres and habitat for the orangutan. Palm oil is used in almost everything that needs cooking oil. And so it's hard to try to find products that don't have it in. But that's another thing that you can look for is products that don't have palm oil.
Right.
Got to be a
I went
label
into-
reader.
I went into Chicago one time and got off the train, went through the Board of Trade building, and on the other edge, there was someone dressed as an orangutan, and they were having a big demonstration against the palm oil industry. Yeah, that was a few years ago.
Out of curiosity, Greg, when you were reading your book, did it cover more than just coffee topics?
That's a good question. The book was about this journalist that took on, she gave herself this project to write a book about cerulean warblers. And so what she did was she found various university research projects that she was able to tag along with, both in this country and in Central and South American countries. And the book was about all of her adventures of going to this place and learning about this, and this place and learning about the wintering grounds for cerulean warblers. So that was sort of her focus, was on that bird and its wintering grounds and its breeding grounds, etc. And if anybody's interested, I can run upstairs and grab that book and show it to you here, so that I found it very interesting, all the different experiences she had associated with the bird. So I'm going to say the short answer was no. I don't think she really dealt with any other kind of environmental issues that did not relate to the cerulean warbler.
You could do a book review for the newsletter.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Well, if anybody wants me to go run upstairs and get that book while you chat, I can be back in 2 minutes.
You could probably send it to us over the chat line.
Well, is anybody on this call right now that is not on the chat line?
Yes, me, Diane.
Oh, Diane. Okay.
Yes. How do I get on the chat line?
email Lee Witkowski.
Okay.
Do you have his email address?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Just send him an email. He is the keeper of the chat group key that unlocks the door for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess just off the top of my head, as I was asking that question, what I suspect is that there are other agricultural issues that affect birds beyond just coffee, and probably we could be interested in those also, if and probably use some kind of products that could make a difference too.
Could very well be.
Hello.
Hi, Joseph.
Hi. I just had I just looked up palm oil, and they said the European Union banned it.
Wow.
And now, because of the deforestation, and they're saying that it could drive more pandemics like COVID-19. And I eat lots of coconuts, but it's from a different palm than palm oil. So I just wondered if it was okay to eat coconuts, or if because that's the oil I like. But I didn't know much about palm oil, but I guess they say it's in shampoos and chocolate. So
You can probably Google it and find out if it's
okay.
Coconut. I think coconut's is natural. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know, Joseph.
I guess Malaysia says that Malaysia is trying to get 100% of its palm oil certified, but I don't know in Indonesia, and some of the others, they might not want it, but Malaysia's trying to get their stuff together from what it says. So yeah, it would be interesting to know what he's doing in Sumatra, and because I know he didn't have time to go into specifics about it, but I'd like to research that and see what I can find. But
Sounds
overall, it was an awesome presentation. I have like 10 pages of notes, so it's pretty great.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah, but I think he said that the ones in Central America aren't monocultures, but the ones in like Asia are monocultures.
Right.
But I have to look into it. I know coconuts are grown a lot in Thailand. So yeah. So that would be interesting. I know the major endangered species are in the Sumatran island, and it's a small island. So he's probably trying to save the island, so yeah, but it's a good thing to know. So
absolutely.
Fair trade and bird friendly is the words, I think, and organics for the bird.
Yes.
Does organic just go with that because of the pesticides in them?
I do know the answer to that, Joseph. If it has that Smithsonian bird-friendly logo, then it automatically is certified organic by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Those two go together.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think palm oil too is really high in saturated fats, so it's not good for you health-wise either.
Yeah,
So I think it's much easier to grow. It probably grows fast, and that's why they make it a mono.
Okay.
I just looked something up online,
Mm-hmm.
and they were saying that a hectare of land can produce 0.38 tons of soybean oil in a year versus 3.7 tons of palm oil.
Wow.
Wow.
So it's economics.
Yeah, it is. They said it's got high yields and low land requirements, and it's the least expensive vegetable oil to make on the market,
Yeah.
for whatever it's worth.
What can we eat or drink? I don't know.
Listen, my grandmother lived on lard sandwiches, so I don't know.
And she probably
guess,
lived to 90, right, Mary?
Just about.
I guess, one
Just about.
obvious solution is try to stay away from fast food as much as possible. And that'll cut down the usages right away, right there. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
I was just taken back that they still use DDT in Central America, and should I even be eating coffee now is my question if it's not certified, because the DDT, I guess the wood thrush's eggs are getting messed up by eating that stuff. That was interesting. I just saw a bald eagle over the Lockport Bridge, and
Oh, nice.
but yeah, they don't go there, so it's sad that DDT is still being used. But
And I think we sell it to them. I think the U.S. manufactures and sells the DDT to other places.
okay, yeah, that's not good.
There are a lot of things to fix in this world.
Yeah.
I was curious about something. I got something in the mail. Now, I would never do this, but they were talking about how you can spray your lawn and get rid of your mosquitoes. And it sounds like a very bad idea to me, but
No.
I don't know if any of you have.
Oh, there's all kinds of fogger things and whatever, but it kills everything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I think that they said the most effective way to eliminate problems with mosquitoes is in Joliet, they quit spraying and they put tablets in the catch basins that hold, the rainwater, and emptying containers in your yard or whatever. But
Yeah, I was listening to someone. They were talking. They were interviewing somebody on a radio program I was listening to, and he was a trucker. And he said, it used to be one time where he would go do his, travel from one place to another, and he'd have to stop every now and then to wipe the bugs off his windshield. He said there were so many bugs. And he said he realized recently that he doesn't have to do that anymore. That, he says occasionally, but he says it's not like it used to be. And that's what awoke in him to the, like what's going on in our environment that we don't have, I remember being hit by big grasshoppers and stuff like that smashed on your windshield. So, yeah.
They say it's the grain crops, that are Roundup resistant. And so they can kill, it's like too much of that. Things that don't support insects are encouraged chemically. And
some of the GMO crops, that's some of the problems with that, is that they are produced to repel insects, or the insects are not
right.
attracted to the plants. So then the birds don't have bugs to eat. It's just
right.
Yep. Oh, another, like 2 years ago, they came through my neighborhood. They do this spray sometimes for the mosquitoes. And I noticed the last couple of years, there's hardly anything here anymore. Even the bees. Now, I don't know if it's because of the problem with the bee population in decline, but I noticed that I could I had to be careful bypassing this one bush because there were so many bees all the time. And then I noticed, like last year, the year before, it was like, where are the bees? So there's hardly any insects out here anymore. So it's like, I noticed that.
I think they even say some of the proven winter plants that you can buy are, I don't know, neonicotinoids or whatever are, and so they repel insects and whatever. So it's like everything is, unfortunately, like my grandkids, they don't like bugs so much. And I'm thinking we need to get over that.
Yeah.
It's getting late. I mean, I remember used to have hundreds of flies that we used to have to whack all summer long with the fly swatter. I don't even have a fly swatter anymore. So
You mean those little, like, small flies, tiny flies?
Like no-see-ums?
Yeah, like the ones in Alaska and and then all the birds eat them, but now they don't have food to eat them. And the flies can't, be spread. It's sad. They're harmless. They do nothing to you. The only time we would get mad is when we were playing tennis, but now we hardly ever see these flies in Romeoville courts. So I don't know if they're pesticiding the lakes by the houses there in O'Hare Woods, or I don't know what is the pesticide situation in the forest preserves? Is any used? Or
I wouldn't think so.
even like the in the marshes, like for the mosquitoes, or do they just let it go?
Well, if there's like Theodore Street goes through a marsh.
Yeah,
So maybe and unfortunately, even though Joliet wasn't spraying, Joliet Township started spraying, which I need to protest because I don't really want my tax money spent for that. But the other thing is when they spray for gypsy moths, which they do to save the oak trees, that kills all of the caterpillars. So that is a tough situation. They try to spot treat it so that they don't get all of the caterpillars, but yeah. They were doing that over by Trinity Services over by the Birdhaven greenhouse.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to sign off.
Okay.
it was nice seeing everybody. This is the first Zoom I've done for the Will County Audubon.
That's great.
Sorry I've missed them, but I'll try to make them again. I love it. Thank you very much for sharing.
Nice seeing you, Mary.
Yeah. Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Nice.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.